Okay, so let's do a recap of FileIO. We're going to write data to file and then read it back in again and display it so we can prove that we've written it to file properly. So let's just create a normal, any old NetBeans project's fine, file, new project. We don't need a JavaFX project for this, we'll just create a plain old Java application, so that'll do for this one. I'll call it FileIO. Okay, and finish. Okay, and so we've got a main method here, and so what we're going to do is we're going to create an array list. I'll map it all out in pseudocode so you can see what I'm doing, and add data to it. Then we're going to write the array list to file, and then clear the array list. I'll paste that, same as writing it again. Clear the array list so there's no data in it, and then we'll read it back in again, and then we'll display the data in the array list to make sure it's there, to make sure to prove that our write and our read work properly. Okay, so we could declare an array list up here at class level, or we could declare one down here inside this main method and pass it to the methods. We might do that. Let's declare the array list down here, and we'll make it an array list just of string. So we just have names in it. Names array list equals new array list. Okay, so there's our array list all declared. We need to do an import. Import for your Java util array list. Okay, there's our array list being declared. Now we want to add some data to it. And on add Moose, Frankie, Bella. That'll do, just 3 names will do. So I'm adding some data to the array list. Now what we'll do is we'll create a method. So we'll do this in methods so that, because then you can reuse the methods later on in other projects, for example. So we'll create methods up here for reading and writing the file. So let's do that. So the first thing we want to do is probably write a file. So public or private, make it doesn't matter, public or private method, we'll keep it private. Private void write file. And that takes in an array list of string. So we want an array list of string called array list. Okay, so we'll pass the names array list across to this method here to write it. And we also want to give it a file to write to. So what order do you want to provide the parameters? I might provide the file name first, string, file name, and then the array list. So when we call the method, we'll provide a file name, and then the array list we're going to write the file, which is an array list of string. Okay. Now in Java, there's at least 10 ways to read and write files, at least. What you're going to do is just choose one you like and stick with that, unless there's good reason to change. Maybe for performance, or maybe you've got a particular question that you've got to solve using a particular type of reading a file. We're just going to create a plain old text file, and it's going to contain the data in the array list. So one of the ways I like to create files or write files, one of the simplest ways is just use a formatter object, formatter, and I'll call it out file equals new formatter, and we're going to pass in the array the name of the file. Okay, so whatever the file's called, whatever gets passed in here is a string, we use that to name the file here. Okay, formatter doesn't exist in our class, we need to do an import util formatter. That's done. Don't worry about this area here, it's about exceptions we're not catching. We'll come on to exceptions shortly. Okay, so now we've declared the formatter. We want to loop through the array list. So for int k is equal to 0, we can use a counter control loop or a for each loop, whatever you like. K is less than array list dot length. K plus plus, and now we want to write each entry in the array list into file. So we want to go out file, our formatter object, out file dot format. And we want to write the array list item dot get k plus, and we'll put it so 1 per line. So one name per line, or one entry in the array list per line. So we'll put a /n there so that's nice and neat. And then what we want to do is close the file. So outfile.close. Close. Okay, and you'll see there's a lot of errors coming up here. This is because we're not catching exceptions or checking for exceptions. Okay, so arraylist.size, arraylist.size. Not length. Length is for arrays, not array lists. Okay, and there's an exception here we need to handle, and file not found exception. So we can put try. So what we need to do, this is an example of a checked exception. You cannot even write the code; it will not compile unless you handle the exceptions. So we could put a try catch here, or we could put a throws on the method header to pass on the responsibility for catching the exception. We're going to handle it all inside the method here. So try. Let's put all this inside the try block. And then a catch. And what sort of exception do we need to catch? So we'll just catch the parent of all exceptions, or one of the main parents. We'll catch exception error. Okay. And you'll see now all our issues have gone, and there's no errors coming out. So if we get an error here, we'll go system.out.println error could not write file for some reason. Maybe the disk was full. Maybe there's errors on it. Maybe there's errors on a disk. Maybe it was a network disk and a network dropped out. Who knows? We don't know. We're just catching the exception. If you want to do more granular error messages here, you can catch different exceptions that can occur from this, and then you can tell whether it's a file issue or a disk space issue or a whatever issue. Okay, but we're just catching an exception, which is one of the big daddies of exception in the exception hierarchy. Okay, and that's it for writing a file. Put a semicolon. There we go. And we're not using error there. What we could do as well, because we want to get the most errors out on the console screen as we can, we'll produce a stack trace as well. Print stack trace. Just while we're testing, we'll make sure we generate a stack trace so we can really see what's going on with the exceptions, if any occur. Okay, that's it for writing a file. Now reading a file. Okay, so we'll do the same sort of thing. We'll create another method. Also make it private again. If we can make them public if we wanted to, if we wanted them accessible outside of our class, but I'll keep them for private for now. And this will be read file. And again, we want to say the file to read and the array list to put the data into. Okay. In fact, what we might do is even be a little bit trickier, is that we'll make it so the method returns an array list. Okay, so we just go read file and say my array list equals read file and then a file. Okay, so we could even do that if we wanted to. Many ways you can do this and set this up. Again, many ways you can read and write files in Java. Many ways. I know at least 10. Let's use our good old friend scanner. Scanner's fine. I'll call it in file, so scanner objects in file. Normally we go equals new scanner, and we say system.in inside the brackets here. But let's now make it so it reads a file and wraps around a file, so we can use it to use scanner to get the data out of a file. So we go new file reader, and then the name of the file, which is file name string. Okay, we need to do an import for scanner, import util scanner, an import for file reader, import Java IO file reader. Looks pretty good. And we've got more exceptions here because we're not dealing with exceptions, but we'll talk about that later. Okay. So when we're reading a file, we want to first create an array list. So array list of string, array list equals new array list of string. We can actually leave those out and just do that. So you don't have to put string there again. You can leave it out if you like. Okay, so we've created our array list. Now we want to read it from file. So while our scanner object is that while there's more data in the file to read, which you can go with infile.hasNext. In other words, while there's more data in the file, while hasNext is true, we're going to read data from a file. And we're just reading one item, one name, or one string per line. Okay. So we'll go that.add, and So we're adding the string to the file, string to the array list that's coming in, and now we want to get the string from the file. So it's in file dot next. Okay, remember when we're getting user input, we use the next command to get the next line of input from the user. Now we're getting the next line of input from a file. So we can use scanner with files really, really well, just like we did with keyboards in prior examples. Okay, and then we've got to close the file. Okay, and that's basically it for reading for reading a file. And we need to return the array list. Return the array list. So we've read the array list in from file. Now we're returning it back to the caller. Okay. The alternative to this would have been to put an array list up here at class level. Okay. One up here at class level, and then we wouldn't have had to pass the array list between all the methods. We could have left that parameter out and just used the one that was declared up here at class level. I've made it so we're passing the array list around. Okay, so many ways you can do it, many ways you can structure your code. The only thing we have to do in here now is to put exception handling. So try, good old try, and then we've got to put the catch, which is going to be similar to this catch up here. It's going to be just the same catch. Could not read file. We're just changing the write to a read. That's what we're changing. And then we return the array list. Now, the array list is declared inside the try block, so it might not, it doesn't exist down here. So we need to move that declaration out. Okay. And the way this currently stands, oh, so we'll get that declared twice. We've done it twice. And the way this currently stands is, if something happens and a file read fails, we're still going to return an empty array list. Okay, I think it's better if the file read fails that you return null, a null array list, completely empty, nothing in it, doesn't even exist. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so we'll declare the array list out here, but we won't initialize it. So we won't create it or initialize it. We're just declaring it. And we'll put the equals new array list inside here. Array list equals. And do we put it before the scanner or after the scanner? I don't think it really matters. We'll create it in here, try and open the file, try and read from the file, and then close the file. And if any of those fail, then we're going to be returning an array list, which is maybe empty or whatever. We might actually move it after the file, after we open the file. Okay. So now if the file open fails, the code's going to jump straight down here, and array list will still be null because we haven't created it yet. Okay, so then we're returning null, which is what I like. That's good. Okay, so that's basically it. So we've declared our array list, we've added a bunch of names to it. Now we want to write it to file. So let's call the write method. Let's just grab that up here. And the write method is write method followed by the file name, which is going to be file.text. And the array list is going to be called names array list, followed by a semicolon. Okay. Okay, so we haven't declared an instance of a class here, so we need to make these methods. Okay, I don't know how to undo that on the top of my head. So we need to make these methods static, because otherwise we have to declare an instance of the FileIO class to instantiate these instance methods. We'll just make them static. It's the best way for what we're doing. So static. So it's two static methods, make them static. And then we can call them from our main, which is a static method. Okay, that fixes that error. So let's run it. Compile, no errors, and run. Oh. Error. Array list might not have been initialized. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Okay, so we declare it up here, but don't initialize it till we get inside here. We don't want to create it until we're inside that method, until after the file's been at least open for reading, so that we can, at least, if that fails, we're still going to return a null array list. But it hasn't been initialized, so what you can do to get around this is just go equals null. Just reassure Java you know what you're doing. Equals null, so it's been initialized to something, even though it's null. Okay, that'll fix that error. there we go. So it's running okay. We're reading a file, but there's nothing in the file. So let's fix that. Actually, we rewrote the file. So we should be able to find the file now. Okay, so just Alt-Tab across to my source folder, and there's file.txt, and there's the names being added. Okay, so that's working great. Moose Frankie Bella gone out to file. Okay, so file.txt has been created. Let's now wire up the read file to read it back in, and we'll also erase the data in the file and display the file as well. Okay, so I've got a few things to do. So down here we're going to erase the array list .clear. So we call the clear method for the array list that empties it out completely of data. Now we want to read it back in. So we're going to call this read method, which returns an array list. So we just pass a file in. Names array list equals read file followed by the name we want to read, which is files.txt or file.txt, followed by a semicolon. And then we just have to display the array list. We used the counter control loop before. Let's use a for each loop. So for each string s in our array list, so we're just using a for each loop now instead of a counter control for loop, just for something different. Let's display them to the screen. Okay, so let's just recap quickly. So we've created an array list, we've populated some data in it, we've written it out to file, we've cleared it so there's no data in it anymore, and then we've read it back in, and then we're displaying the data to the screen for the very first time. We haven't displayed it before to the screen until now. Okay, let's see how we go. And there it is there coming out to the screen. So our code's working perfectly, no exceptions being raised. Everything looks good. There are a few little enhancements we can make to make our code even simpler and shorter. Let's have a look at those. Okay, so up here with our write to file, we can use this isn't quite correct, this code here. This isn't quite correct. Okay, because if we get an exception on our file when we're reading it or opening it or whatever, or writing it, this close here will never run. Okay, so it's in the wrong spot. So let's move it into the right spot. And for that we need a finally clause. So finally runs whether there's an exception or not. Okay, so if you need code that must run no matter what happens up here in the try block, this code must run no matter what, put it down here in the finally block. This is where you put all your cleanup code. Okay, now we're getting that the out file doesn't exist because out file is declared here. So you've got to move things around a little bit. Let's move out file declaration to outside the main, or outside that try block, and just set it to just declare it. Okay, and down here we're just initializing it. So we're declaring out file, and now we're initializing out file inside of our try block. We're going to do that inside our try block because that might raise an exception. We're going to do this outside here because we need it down here to close the file if the try block craps out. Okay, now everything's fine, but we've still got an issue here. Out file might not have been initialized. Okay, so let's set it to null. Again, the trick we used earlier. Set it to null so at least it's initialized to something, even though it's null. Okay, now down here in our finally block, we don't want to close that file if out file is null. So we just want to do this quick little check. If out file is not equal to null, then close the file. Okay. And same with reading files. So again, if any of this code up here causes an exception, the close will never close. So the file will never be closed. You could lose data. You could lose whatever. You know, when you're trying to eject a disk, it might not eject because the file's still locked. All those sorts of things could happen. So we want to move that inside of finally as well. Okay, so infile.close, and we want to use the same trick as above. We want to declare infile before the loop or before the try block equals null, and then just create it inside here, initialize it inside here, declare it out there. So it's scanner infile up here, and it's just infile equals down here. Make sure you get that right. If you try and declare it again down here, it'll say object already exists. Okay, so you got to make sure you take off the declaration. Just do the initialization part. Okay, same applies to writing. Initialization, declaration. Or other way around. We're declaring it here and initializing it to null, and then we're creating the object to be a proper out file formatter. Okay, and then the same thing down here. If infile is not equal to null, if infile is not equal to null, then we can close the file. Okay, so let's compile and run that again. Make sure that still works. And run. And moves Frank Bella coming out. So beautiful. Everything's still working. Okay, but of course, we're not done yet. We can still improve this further. Okay, so the way we improve it further is we can use our... There's a great, a terrific new version of the try that came out with Java 7 called Try with Resources. Try with Resources. And that's where you can declare things inside round brackets up here, in round brackets, not curly brackets, round brackets up here. So you put all the things that you might create or use that cause exceptions up here, and then Java automatically cleans them up for you. Okay, so we can go formatter out file equals new formatter, and then we can get rid of that. Don't need that anymore. Don't need that anymore. Okay. And now we don't have to worry about even closing the file. Java takes care of that for us automatically. So we can take off the finally block. Okay, so we've just reduced our code by 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code, 5 lines of code sort of thing. We've reduced it by. Okay, so that's a nice little saving. Okay, so try with resources. Well worth exploring. And you don't have just one line of code in here. You can put multiple lines separated by semicolons. Put them on the next line if you want to. You can have try with finally block. The try with resources block in round brackets there can be huge. Okay, but we've just got one thing that might cause an exception. Okay, so we're shortening our code, simplifying, saving us issues, saving us worries. Java's taking care of stuff for us. Okay, so don't need that anymore. Don't need that, and we don't need the finally block. By making use of try with resources. Okay. Let's do the same thing on the rights. Okay, we'll put a try with resources in. So it's scanner in file equals that. No semicolon because it's just one line of code, and we'll take that out, and also take that out. And so now we don't have to worry about that declaration or that initialization, and we don't need to worry about the finally either. So I could delete those lines if I wanted to. I'm just leaving them in there so you can see that they were there. Okay, if you want to go back to the old way of doing things. So again, we've shortened our code. We've again saved ourselves another 5 lines of code or so by just using try with resources. So well worth using. Well worth using. Let's make sure our code still works. Compile and run, and everything's coming out nicely. Okay, so that's a quick recap of FileIO. There's many ways to read a file in Java, many ways. I've just shown you one way to read and one way to write, but I found the trick is just find a way that you like working with and stick with that, unless there's good reason to change or unless you've been asked to change. Okay, so I hope this video was useful. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day. Oh, and of course, all of the code in my videos is linked in the description. It's in my GitHub, which is public. You can just go and download the source code, and it's linked in the description below. So thanks for watching. Have a nice day.